The MMA fortune teller.
The teller, the teller, the teller, the teller, the teller, the teller.
What is up, you guys? The teller checking in for the Ultimate Fighter 29 Episode 1 recap. For those of you guys that are new to the channel, we do it all over here. We preview each UFC card the week of. We recap the prior week's events. We do fighter interviews. We do it all over here. We preview the rankings of each division. We do it all. The channel has really been growing. So first and foremost, I want to tell all you guys that have been supporting me. I appreciate every single one of you guys. And like I said, for those of you guys that are new to the channel, maybe just coming over here for these Ultimate Fighter episode recaps, thank you for tuning in. And hopefully I will make this informative for you guys. Maybe for some of you guys that even miss an episode or two, I can keep you guys in the loop there. I'm sure I'm not the only one that is very excited to see the Ultimate Fighter back in effect. I think it's been since 2018 or 2019, but it's been some time. And I'm very happy that it's back. It brings a whole different aspect to the fight game. Of course, we're no stranger to getting fights as of recently. We have Dana White's Contender Series over the past couple years. There's UFC events going on every single weekend. But this shows a little bit more than that. You get to know these fighters more on a personal level. You get to see them interact in the house and whatnot. And I do believe that it makes the fights just that much more entertaining when they actually do go down. And it's exciting to see the winner, where his career progresses, and even some of the guys that still, pick up their career, from the ground, and still, even after maybe not having the most successful stint on the show, they still get their career going. It's just, you really get to know the fighters on a personal level. So I do really enjoy watching this show. So yeah, we had the first episode last night, episode 1, and I do want to give you guys just a quick recap of what my thoughts are on the show so far. And I will start to bring up some of the better comments on the show here. So if you guys want to get your voice out, like I said, feel more than free to comment below. Please do hit that like button, subscribe if you guys can. I'd highly appreciate it over here if you guys can do that for me. And with no further ado, let's take a look at episode 1 of TUF 29. So, as many of you guys already know, the coaches are Brian Ortega and Alexander Volkanovski. They will be throwing down in the very near future. The fight will be for the featherweight championship of the world. And, let's start talking about Brian Ortega here. Brian Ortega is a guy, his striking has jumped leaps and bounds over the last couple of years, in particularly his boxing. Of course, we all know about his grappling, some of the best in the UFC. But this is a guy that has big-time star potential. If this guy becomes the champion, I could see him being a big star in the UFC. So, there's a lot riding for him coming up in the near future. Alexander Volkanovski, of course, this is a guy that just hardly ever loses. I believe he's on a 19-fight win streak. Did have that one questionable fight against Max Holloway, but I did think that he won the first time pretty clearly there. So, Alexander Volkanovski, just an absolute beast of a man, on the shorter side, but you can tell this guy is just so stout. He's so physically strong and well-rounded. This was a guy that used to walk around in the 200s somewhere there as far as his weight goes. This guy was a rugby player. He's just a brute of a man, and I'm quite the fan of both of these guys. If I'm being honest, I don't know who I'm going to be rooting for as this show progresses. Usually I know pretty clearly going into the show. I don't know right now. I'm going to let things kind of play out and see who I gravitate towards more so. And of course, as I start to root for them on the show, I will be rooting for that particular fighter when they finally do throw down. Unless, as we break down the tape, I see some value on a specific line, and I'm just taking it as the money goes. But time will tell as far as that all goes. But I'm very excited for that fight, and I think these guys are going to be really good coaches. Brian Ortega seems to be very motivated and taking this very serious as far as the coaching goes and all that. This is a guy that is very closely connected to the Gracie roots. He's been trained by many of the Gracies and whatnot, and he carries that same type of desire and love for the game. So you got to love seeing that, as we saw in episode 1. Ortega is taking this very serious, and I think the same can be said about Volkanovski. Volkanovski is taking this very serious as well. He's strictly business in there, and he wants to win. He wants his teammates to win. And I like that. It's not like one of those shows where you have one of the coaches that's just there just to be there. I think both of these guys want to go out and have their guys win every single time. They're taking the training sessions extremely serious. So that is something that's really cool to see. So, of course, on episode 1 of The Ultimate Fighter, the coaches do have to draft their teams. In this case, Team Volkanovski had the first pick. Therefore, Ortega had control of matching up the first fight, which is the fight we're going to be talking about here in a second. And he also has control, or had control, to pick the second fight because there's 2 different weight divisions. So he's also able to pick that first bantamweight matchup. So this is Team Volkanovski here. Mitch Raposo was the first fighter taken overall, and obviously the first fighter taken for Team Volkanovski. Some notable guys that Volkanovski did draft was Dustin Lampros. That's a guy that some of you guys are probably familiar with, an undefeated fighter. I know he represents MMA Island. I know those guys are always doing their thing together. Shout out to MMA Island as well. Some other notable names: Ricky Tercios, Gilbert Urbina. These are some of the guys we've seen fight, right? We've seen them throw down. This guy Ryder Newman. This guy, they've been showing him a lot on the show, at least in episode 1. This guy is seems like a tough dude. I was looking into some fight tape on him. This is a guy maybe keep an eye on. A little curious how he's gonna perform out there. So these were some of the guys here. And as far as the records go, Mitch Raposo undefeated at 5-0. Dustin Lampros also undefeated at 5-0. 2 undefeated bantamweights. Gilbert Urbina 6-1 as a middleweight. Ricky Tercios has some of the more experience on Team Volkanovski. Only 12 professional fights, but still some of the more experienced fighters. One of the more experienced fighters on the show. We take a look at Team Ortega. Team Ortega, Ortega's first selection was Dan Argueta. He's also another 5-0 bantamweight. So we got three undefeated bantamweights at 5-0. His second selection was Andre Petroski, who was the fighter on episode 1. He also drafted notable names as Vincent Murdoch. Vincent Murdoch, Team Alpha Male product. We've seen him fight on Dana White's Contender Series. And Ortega, actually, they had the last fighter, right? So since Volkanovski picked first, they ended up getting the last fighter. I always like to just keep an eye on that last fighter, right? It's Kemron Lakhinov. And, he had some slick words, when he was the last guy picked. He said, these guys will see what's up. We'll see if I was worthy of being the last picked fighter when we step into the cage. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I'm excited to see him get in there because those guys always have a chip on their shoulder. Remember now, Kelvin Gastelum was a guy that was picked last, but ended up winning the show there. So, that's pretty much, a brief background on some of these guys. Josh Reddinghouse, an older fighter. This is going to be the veteran of the show that's going to try to, have one last bang in his MMA career. I mean, doesn't have much more time in the fight game. If he doesn't win this, I don't really know what's going to be left for him at the age that he's at. And there's some guys that have a lot of experience. This guy Trezin Gore, keep an eye on him. This guy's a knockout artist. He only wants to go in there and take guys' heads off, according to him. So, some exciting fighters, man. Some real exciting fighters here. So the first fight on episode 1 was Andre Petroski taking on Aaron Phillips. First and foremost, Aaron Phillips not to be mixed up with the other Aaron Phillips that has fought in the UFC and whatnot at a lighter weight. This is a middleweight Aaron Phillips that's fighting out of Alaska. We saw some background on this guy. He's a very interesting guy. He claims to have taught himself Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's definitely believable if you've seen where he lives in Alaska. It's very isolated and very desolate, and there's not really a lot going on there. So I'm sure he did teach a lot of his jiu-jitsu skills to himself, as there's probably not just a bunch of MMA gyms on every corner, when basically the corner is just an igloo or a bunch of snow. So, so this guy, Aaron Phillips, in my opinion, going into this fight, you take a look at Aaron Phillips. He's a big boy, but I think that he could certainly lose a little bit of weight. I think he could tone up a little bit. I know he's tall. He's not a small fighter. You take a look at him here. Aaron Phillips he's a solid 6 foot. I think he has a decent reach too. Looking at him, he's a solid boy. I just think that he could be a little bit more chiseled. I think he could lose a little bit of weight. And I would probably like to see him, possibly fight at the welterweight division, if I'm being honest. But again, this is a guy that didn't have a lot of experience. He was not a guy that's really polished up, that's been training at some of these bigger gyms. And then we have his opponent, Andre Petroski, who is a Gracie product, fighting out of New Jersey, but I believe he trains in Philly, Henzo Gracie Philly. This is a guy that's a very tough wrestler. He's been wrestling since he was a young buck. We saw pictures of him as a little kid. He said he's been winning wrestling championships since he was 4. So he has the wrestling experience. Definitely seems to have that power in his hands. 29 years old. This is a guy that's fought a lot in the art of war. I believe he actually had a main event slot there over in LFA. He did lose that fight to Aaron Jeffrey, who I do want to talk about for a quick second. But he lost that fight in the main event spot against a guy that's a very talented fighter. But so the point I bring this up, the reason for bringing that up is he's had the spotlight on him. Being in the main event in LFA, that's almost as big as it gets outside the UFC. He did get finished in the second round. But I said I wanted to talk about Aaron Jeffrey just for the fact that this is a guy we saw fight on Dana White's Contender Series a long time ago. He's 10-2, but has really been putting it together. The guy that he lost to was Brendan Allen, very, very talented UFC middleweight fighter. He lost by way of rear naked choke in the first round. Since then, he's on a 4-fight winning streak. And again, an impressive victory over Andre Petroski, and some finishes over some other guys, Bruno Assas, and that guy, his only other loss was to Sean Brady as well. Sean Brady, a very, very talented, undefeated fighter who will be fighting Kevin Lee here in the near future. So just keep an eye on this guy, Aaron Jeffrey. I expect something to be going on with him in the near future here. But Andre Petroski, so if it wasn't for that loss, this guy, has been really doing his thing. So, the fight kicks off. If you're, like I said, if you're analyzing these guys, Petroski is a guy that's just way more chiseled. He's ripped up. He looks it looks like he has that power. You can just kind of tell, even if you haven't really watched too much film on him, you can tell this guy has some power in his hands. He's an explosive wrestler. Aaron Phillips, on the other hand, you see him in some of the training videos, the training clips they showed on the show. This guy is very light in his feet. He's in there. He seems very comfortable in the feet, but he doesn't seem really overwhelming there as far as I'm concerned. A 5-2 fighter. You definitely have to have Petroski as the favorite going into this fight. So things start to kick off, and they're a little bit hesitant in there. I think it was about 3 minutes into the first round before we really even saw things starting to kick off. But once it did, it really started to escalate quickly. You saw Phillips hitting Petroski with some leg kicks and whatnot. But Petroski just seemed to be in control of what he was doing, and I felt like he was waiting for the right moment where he was just going to handle business and make his move. And his game plan was the takedown. I believe that. His game plan was the takedown. He knows he has that wrestling experience in his back pocket. And eventually that's what he did. He shot in. Phillips almost stuffed that takedown too. He was in position. He was trying to reverse him, but he just... Petroski was just too much. He kept pushing through and ended up flattening him out there. So Petroski gets on top, where he eventually sets up the mounted guillotine, which it was a nasty one. If any of you guys have ever been in that position, you guys know it goes hard, man. If you ever been put in a guillotine, while you're flattened out, man. So obviously a lot of you guys have, right? So Phillips was forced to tap. He loses the fight here. Now Phillips is a guy that, you heard Volkanovski tell him, just stay ready, focus on staying healthy and whatnot, because if one of these guys falls out, you may have another opportunity, which is something we see take place on these shows quite often. But the star of the show is Andre Petroski. This is a guy that now we all have to be excited to see in his next fight. This guy is definitely UFC caliber, at least in my opinion. He has the wrestling experience. He has some pop in his hands. He's composed out there. He gets some really solid training in, and they showed a little bit of his backstory and whatnot. And he's a cool dude. One thing I will say, they show his backyard, and it looks a little bit almost like a dirty lake up in Jersey, which I hope I don't get too much hate for this, man. Shout out to you guys up in the Northeast, but I don't know what's up with you guys. He's talking about how he has paradise behind his house. Meanwhile, it's freezing up there half the year. The water looked dirty. I could show you some spots in Florida that are a lot nicer than that, and they're not even that pricey. Okay, so and I know a lot of people are moving to Florida as well, but maybe Petroski needs to wake up. Maybe if I ever get a hold of him for an interview, I'll let him know they got some great training down here in Florida, and there's some spots that you can get that look a lot nicer than that. But you gotta love that, you know, he's got the wave runners and whatnot, and he's ready to go out in that cold little lake behind his house. But yeah, the winner was Petroski, so he's moving through in the middleweight division now, and that will lead us to the preview of next week's show, which we're going to see a middleweight bout of Mitch Raposo, who was the first fighter selected, undefeated 5-0, been doing his thing even as an amateur, 5-0 as well. So basically on about a 10-fight win streak. And this guy seems to be very well-rounded. I broke some tape down on him. He's a very polished grappler, knows how to get the fight down to the mat and really controls opponents. Well-rounded on the feet as well. He's fighting this guy, Liudvik Sholinian, the Ukrainian fighter. He's 9-1-1. Broke down some tape on him. This is a guy that just really likes to push the pace, seems to come in good shape. I wasn't overly impressed with his striking, but definitely goes in there and looks to just, you know, absolutely wear his opponents out and just push the pace on him. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. Last loss was over in Bellator, Bellator 209 to Sidmar Hanario. So, you know, a decently impressive resume. I mean, 12-1-1, had the one draw as well. This is a fight that I'm excited for. You know, it's always exciting seeing the number one pick throw down. You know, was he worthy of that selection there? And, you know, as far as where his opponent was taken, he was the number 3 fighter selected for Ortega. So we're seeing the number 1 fighter from Volkanovski and Mitch Raposo at 5-0 taking on the number 3 fighter selected and the number 2 bantamweight for Ortega there. So it should be a good matchup on paper. I'm excited for it. For all of you guys that are Ultimate Fighter fans, I know you guys will be tuned in next Tuesday. And yeah. And you guys can expect these videos to keep coming out the day after every episode. I'll just give a brief description of what happened. If you guys miss any episodes, I'll keep you up to date and just, you know, try to preview some of these fighters so you guys get a better idea of who these guys are, even going into the fight for the following week and whatnot. So yeah, I appreciate all you guys for tuning in. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And if you guys, like I said, if you're just here for my Ultimate Fighter breakdowns or recaps and whatnot, keep in mind I do fight predictions for each UFC card, Bellator cards. It's more, I mean, we break down the entire fight card, but I also take a deep look into it as far as betting goes as well. So if you guys are fans of MMA betting, I look into it, and as far as that aspect goes as well. And I have a bunch of content coming out to you guys, so please do subscribe. And I appreciate every single one of you guys. Signing out. The MMA fortune teller.
The teller.